Welcome to Disclosure Network New York. Today is Sunday, August 18th, 2019. I'm Nick Curto, dnny Director and Co-Founder. dnny is a grassroots organization now celebrating our 18th year of providing 2 meetings per month throughout the year in Manhattan. We focus on cutting-edge UFO ET issues, paranormal phenomenon, and many related and very important subjects that are in back of the mainstream news headlines. In other words, who or what is pulling the strings in back of the curtain. Our members do intense investigative research into these various topics and share that information with the group at our meetings, as well as our many internet followers on YouTube, as well as our own website. Our motto right from day one is, quote, connecting the dots to seek truth, unquote. We have available to everyone worldwide the dnny News Blast email service focusing on cutting-edge topics of special interest, and that is totally free. Just visit our website, which is www.dnny.info, and type in your email address and click to send. You'll then be connected with our group, what we're doing, and the many news items that come up throughout the week. Many hundreds of people have already signed on for this service. You may hear dnny meetings as well on our website as well as on YouTube. Now then, our featured guest speaker for today's meeting is a longtime member of dnny and a truly awesome researcher, Marcy J. Gordon. Marcy, a very warm welcome to you. Now, Marcy has been singing and playing a variety of musical instruments since the age of 6. She is also a wonderful visual artist, an actor, and an award-winning writer, a songwriter, and a stand-up comedian. Also a healer and a professional psychic. Marcy is also a highly experienced technologically and intellectual property and general commercial contract attorney, and a technology contracts procurer professional with over 16 years of experience in large Wall Street firms. She is an in-depth experiencer from infancy. Marcy has 2 certificates in Reiki and 3 certificates in ARIC, Ancient Rainbow Conscious Healing. She is a certified ARC Master. I would like to start the interview by just welcoming her in, and Marcy, take it away. I'm so looking forward, as well as everybody in the room, to your presentation. So please go right ahead.
First of all, I would like to thank Nick for inviting me to speak here today. It's a pleasure to see all of you here in the room, and I'd like to give a shout out to all of the people out in cyberspace who are listening to a recording of this presentation. As members of this group know, reality is not what we've been led to believe by our teachers in school, the mainstream news media, and many religious teachings. I apologize in advance to those of you who believe everything your religion tells you is true, but it isn't. Religions may contain pieces of the truth, but no religion contains the entire truth. If you don't believe me, consider this. There are all these different religions in the world saying, our way is the only way and the rest of you are heathens. So how could any of these religions be the complete truth? Furthermore, there are many different sects within each of the mainstream religions that fight with each other, sometimes viciously. This applies to Christianity, Judaism, Islam, Buddhism, and Hinduism. Several years ago, an Orthodox Jewish rabbi in the Williamsburg section of Brooklyn, right here in New York City, shot another Orthodox rabbi to death over a difference of opinion regarding a passage in the Torah. This is complete ego-driven insanity. But that is what religious beliefs can do to people. This horrific act illustrates why people need to think for themselves instead of blindly believing what they were told to believe and blindly doing what they are told to do without thinking about whether it makes any sense logically and without tuning into their innate knowing to discern whether it makes any sense intuitively. The universe is one giant organism of which we are each a part. Mainstream religions have disempowered people by teaching that God is external to us, or that God is everything and we are nothing. The truth is that the human soul is part of the divine consciousness. Have you ever heard the expression, look within, you are the Buddha?
Yes.
That's what it means. Our souls are immortal. So the idea that you need to accept a particular belief system in order to obtain eternal life is ridiculous. You already have eternal life. The soul never dies. The so-called kingdom of heaven is the realization that all human beings are born with godlike powers. That is why the biblical Jesus said that the kingdom of heaven is within you.
Within you.
I'm not going to get into whether the biblical Jesus was a real historical figure or whether he was an amalgam of different avatars, because I don't know. However, the words attributed to Jesus validate what I said earlier about religions having pieces of the truth. Because the kingdom of heaven is divine consciousness, we all have the innate ability to tap into it. Hence, the kingdom of heaven is within. But don't just take my word for it. Please take a moment to meditate on that concept. Tune into your inner knowingness, and tell me whether it resonates with you as truth. Does it feel true to you? Yeah. It's okay if it doesn't. One of the things that is happening astrologically is that we are moving from the age of Pisces to the age of Aquarius. What this means in plain English is that we are moving from the age of belief to the age of knowledge. The problem with belief systems is that they can be wrong. True knowledge, gnosis, can never be wrong. The reason we are moving into the age of knowledge is that the proof of the nature of reality will be undeniable. We already have some of this proof. Remember what I just said about your soul being immortal? We already have mathematical proof of this. Albert Einstein gave it to us. He said E equals mc squared. It is because of that equation that Einstein said energy can neither be created nor destroyed. If energy is equal to matter times the square of the speed of light, then energy is matter and matter is energy. What is the difference between a living being and a dead one? Energy. Our consciousness exists as energy and can never be destroyed. It can inhabit one or more physical vessels simultaneously and or sequentially, but it cannot ever die unless it chooses to go back to source and begin its soul evolution from scratch. But the esotericism of that subject is beyond the scope of today's presentation. Now I would like to share with you some of my personal history that led to my awakening to the falsity of the matrix. By matrix, I am referring to the false reality constructs that the vast majority of humanity have been brainwashed and mind-controlled into believing are real. Fortunately, I was born into a family that, while ethnically Jewish, did not have any use for religion. My father was an atheist and my mother was an agnostic. Therefore, I was spared the pain of having to go through what life coach Nancy Ellis calls the 8 stages of recovering from organized religion. I will address these stages a little later because they are very similar to what many people go through when disconnecting from the matrix. When I was 2 years old, I loved going outside early in the morning in the warm weather. I would listen to the birds and the animals and the trees and the flowers and the plants talking to me. Then when I got older, I lost this ability for several years because I was socialized to think that plants and animals don't talk. It took until midlife for me to recover my natural abilities as a plant and animal telepath simply by understanding that plant and animal communication is real. Modern science is just starting to grasp the idea that plants and animals have thoughts and feelings, and that such thoughts and feelings are more sophisticated than previously believed. Last year, in May of 2018, I had a remarkable experience with someone I met in this group. We spent a few hours hiking in Central Park. Then we sat on a bench on the west side of the park by the lake beyond the boathouse, and I took this person on a shamanic journey. When we finished, we were both in a slightly altered state. Those of you who were present when I did a group shamanic journey with this group or have had a private session with me know what I'm talking about. A squirrel came up behind the bench we were sitting on and looked at me. Then it climbed up onto the bench right beside me. What happened next astonished me, my companion, and everyone who witnessed it. This squirrel climbed up my right arm, looked me directly in the eye, and then turned around and clambered down. This was a completely wild animal, yet it felt a special connection with me, and it let me know this. Starting in the first grade at the age of 6, coming home from school on the bus, I always knew within 3 mailboxes of my parents' mailbox if there was something in the mailbox for me. My accuracy on this task was 100%. This happened every single time I took the school bus home. I had no idea how I could accurately predict when there was a letter in the mail for me, but I could. I had my first astral projection experience at the age of 8, although at the time I had no idea what astral projection even was. Here is what happened. In the middle of the school year, a new girl joined my 2nd grade class. Her family had just moved to town. Her birthday was in April. Because she was new and didn't know very many people yet, she invited all of the girls in our 2nd grade class to her birthday party. No one I knew had ever been to this girl's house, so no one could possibly have described her family's home to me. The night before the party, I had what I thought was a dream, which I now recognize as an astral projection experience. In the quote-unquote dream, I went through every room in the downstairs part of the house. The next day, when I got to the party, I was astonished to see that the house was exactly as I had seen in my dream. Every piece of furniture, every picture on the walls, every knickknack. It was then that I realized with a shock that some part of my consciousness had actually been in that house. I also knew that I could not discuss this experience with anyone because they would either accuse me of lying or think I was crazy. This was 1964, when psychics were in the closet. If you were psychic or had any kind of nonlinear experience, you simply did not talk about it. Mm-hmm. It was a completely taboo subject unless you came from a family that studied astrology and various divination techniques, which my family did not. This experience taught me at a very early age that reality is not what most people think it is, and that certain people have abilities that, while denied by most of the population, were definitely real. Although I knew that I could not discuss this experience with anyone, I also knew that when I got older, I would meet other people like myself, and that we would be able to discuss our experiences. By the time I got to high school, I knew who the other psychics were, and they knew who I was. We would discuss our psychic experiences in lowered voices behind closed doors. The family of the girl whose party led to my first astral projection experience moved away from our town after only a year and a half, but I never forgot her or that experience. But this story gets even weirder. Last spring, I received a LinkedIn invitation from someone I knew, and I accepted it. As most of you probably know, when you accept an invitation on LinkedIn, you get served up with a list of all of that person's contacts to see if you know anyone in common. I usually don't take the time to go through a person's contacts because doing so is often a time-consuming and time-wasting task. Yet my intuition told me to look through this person's contact list and see if there was anyone I knew. Lo and behold, there was a woman in South Carolina with the same name and the same spelling as my childhood friend, whom I'd neither seen nor heard from since we were 9 years old. So I sent her a LinkedIn invitation asking if she was my old friend from childhood. Guess what? She was. We reconnected and discovered we have many things in common. Always be on the lookout for synchronicities, because synchronicity is the fabric of the universe. This experience also illustrates the importance of listening to one's own intuition. When I was in junior high, my school was having a school fair. The older students were offered the opportunity to have booths. I decided to have a fortune-telling booth even though I knew nothing about astrology, palmistry, tarot cards, or any other divination technique. I decorated my booth with astrological symbols and offered psychic readings. But here's the thing. Some of the younger children, whom I didn't even know, sat down at my booth and I gave them real psychic readings. They were completely freaked out. While I had no idea on a conscious level what I was doing, my subconscious mind certainly knew what it was doing. That experience served as additional confirmation that reality is not what most people believe it to be. This knowledge was confirmed at the end of that school year through another experience. It was 1970, and I was 14 years old. I had become an environmental activist at the age of 10 when I read Rachel Carson's seminal work, Silent Spring. There was a children's ecology walk in my town to raise money for ecology awareness. We were taking pledges of money for every mile we walked for the cause. But we weren't just walking. We were picking up garbage on the side of the road and singing protest songs. This was the height of the Vietnam War, after all. There were about 50 of us, ranging in age from 8 to 16. There we were, a peaceful group of child activists, walking by the side of the road, singing protest songs and picking up garbage. We were hardly a threat to the power structure. Yet the local police force sent 2 squad cars to accompany us on our walk. The town had perhaps 10 squad cars in total. So sending 2 police cars to follow us was a significant percentage of the local police force. I realized by the way the police treated us that they were not there to assure our safety. They thought we were dangerous radicals who needed to be surveilled. It was at that moment I realized what a police state this country really is, and has been for a long time. The happy horse crap we were fed in elementary school, that the policeman is your friend, I now knew was a total lie. And this was before 4 college students were shot dead by police at a peaceful anti-war rally at Kent State University. I was still a child, yet I woke up to the reality of the police state an entire year before the rest of the country did. I started researching conspiracies in 1974 after reading a novel. It was Arthur Koestler's Darkness at Noon. Why that particular book precipitated an interest in studying conspiracy theory, I cannot tell you. All I know is that it did, and I have never looked back. But I also learned that you cannot convince people of things they are simply not ready to hear. Back in the early 1980s, I tried to talk to people about Roswell and the Illuminati, and they looked at me as if I had 2 heads. Now everyone knows what happened in Roswell and who the Illuminati are. But back then, people who discussed these subjects were considered total and complete whack jobs. When I came out of college in 1979, the CIA planted an operative on me. By then, I was not just an environmental and anti-war activist. I was an activist on a variety of economic and social justice issues. Evidently, my name had appeared in too many databases, so the CIA computer flagged me as someone they needed to collect some human intelligence on. How do I know there was a CIA operative planted on me? Because this particular operative had 2 problems. The first was alcoholism, which is quite common among CIA agents and operatives. The second was that he fell in love with me. He was calling me up drunk at 3 in the morning and asking me to marry him. So how did I know he was a CIA operative? Because he told me. This is what happened. He called me at work sometime in the summer of 1982 and said that he'd been on a bad bender and it was imperative that I have lunch with him that day. This was prior to my entering law school. At lunch, he prefaced his remarks by saying, "I know you are never going to believe what I'm about to tell you." He truly believed he was safe in outing himself because he genuinely thought I would never in a million years believe him. But my intuition told me that what he was about to tell me was 100% true. So I listened carefully to every word. As he told his story, all of the things that had never made sense to me about this man suddenly fit into place. First, he told me that he'd been recruited into the CIA right out of college, and that they had financed his management consulting and tax accounting business. Since this man had attended Marlborough College, an alternative educational institution, and had previously told me he had spent most of his college years getting drunk and playing cards, this made complete sense. He was highly intelligent, but did not work hard in college. Furthermore, he was from a middle-class family who could afford to send him to college. Higher education was nowhere near as expensive in the late 60s and early 70s as it is now, but there is no way they could have afforded to have set him up in business. He had shown me his childhood home in the Mount Airy section of Philadelphia, so I knew his family were solidly middle class. Then he told me he had left the CIA. This is impossible. No one can actually leave the CIA, but I do not know whether he knew that at the time. He said he'd been planted on me to see if I could be recruited to spy on the activist community. He reported back that I sincerely believed in what I was doing and that no amount of money could ever convince me to spy on activists for the CIA. What this man did not know is that I was able to verify his employment with the CIA. At the time, I had a friend, who I'm still friends with, whom I met when he was a systems programmer at a large university medical school and hospital, and I was an applications programmer. The school colors are black and blue. I kid you not. Cannot make this up. Medical school with an allied health school, and their school colors are black and blue. My programmer friend was a computer security expert who had been in the U.S. Air Force. Due to his computer expertise and his military connections, he sometimes did consulting for the military because he could fix ancient computer systems that were no longer in use in the private sector, but were still being used in the military. Due to the sometimes sensitive nature of this work, he had a security clearance from the Air Force and could access government databases. Previously, I had introduced my CIA friend to my programmer friend because super intelligent people always like to meet other super intelligent people. Unbeknownst to my CIA friend, I told my programmer friend what my CIA friend had said about being employed by the CIA and recently having left the CIA. My programmer friend confirmed that both pieces of information were true. 2 weeks later, however, I received a call from my programmer friend saying, "Guess who's just rejoined Mother Langley?" That's when I found out that the CIA has a Hotel California feature. You can check out anytime you like, but you can never leave. For those of you who missed that reference, go to YouTube and Google Hotel California by the Eagles. It's a great song. I first had my telephone tapped by the federal government in the summer of 1981. I was in between jobs and had met a recruiter who was a Native American. She got me interested in volunteering some of my time to the American Indian movement. The story we were attempting to publicize was made into a Hollywood movie 11 years later called Thunderheart. And when I saw the movie, I couldn't believe it. I had my phone tapped for this, and now it's a Hollywood movie? After beginning volunteer work for the AIM, I started hearing strange clicks on my telephone line. I'd said something to her about it. She explained that there was a pen register on her phone, and that when she called my number, the FBI automatically put a pen register on my phone. A pen register records the numbers of all incoming and outgoing calls on a telephone line. This is one of the ways intelligence agencies justify their bloated budgets and just treat everyone like a suspect and grab more money. By 1985, the U.S. government had replaced all of their old telephone tapping technology with new technology that did not allow you to hear the clicks on the line. But they didn't just throw that technology away. They sold it to other countries. I used to hear the same clicks when I received calls from Israel and Nigeria. But now you cannot hear whether your telephone is being tapped. You need a wiretap expert to check your line. In 1987, I was complaining to a wiretap expert friend that my phone was tapped. I have a lot of interesting friends. My wiretap expert friend was absolutely convinced that I was being paranoid. So he came over one day with his equipment to test my line. After checking my line, he got a really pissed off expression on his face and said, "Lady, you've got company on the line." I said, "I know that. Now we both do." He offered to remove the tap, but since I did not want him to get into any legal trouble, I told him to just leave it where it was. Besides, they would have just put another tap on the line, so what would have been the point of removing it? When I was in law school in the mid-1980s, through an interesting set of circumstances, I found myself at a mafia party in Philadelphia. I viewed this experience as an adventure in urban anthropology. The person who threw the party was named Rocco, a walking cultural stereotype if ever there was one. The following week, Rocco called me and invited me to come with him to a party on his boat over the weekend. Not wanting to be gang raped on a boat that I could not escape from, I politely declined by thanking him graciously for his invitation and saying that I had a prior commitment. All I had told people at the party about myself was that my name was Marcy, I was a law student, and I lived in the neighborhood where the party was. I did not give anyone my last name or address or the name of the law school I attended. This was in 1984. There was no internet. There was no World Wide Web. The only way to get someone's publicly listed telephone number was from the telephone book, the telephone company. The AT&T telephone company monopoly had not yet been broken up. There was only Ma Bell. Or from the government. You have to put your telephone number on your tax return, right? I realized that without knowing anything other than my first name, my status as a law student, and the neighborhood I lived in, Rocco could only have gotten my number from the telephone company or the federal government. It was at that moment I realized that the mafia has connections all throughout government and industry. I am sure it comes as no surprise to people in this room the extent of cooperation between the mafia and U.S. intelligence. And for those of you here or in cyberspace who are not familiar with these connections, then I suggest you read Whitney Webb's excellent 3-part series on Jeffrey Epstein, because she goes into the background of this very well. She's also an excellent researcher. In the summer of 1984, I had a summer internship in the legal department of a large defense contractor. This may seem like a strange thing for a pacifist to do, but I needed the job experience, and for me it was research. In fact, the day of my interview that spring, I arrived at school wearing a suit because I was going to the interview immediately after school and would not have time to go home and change. That morning, there was a demonstration in front of the law school protesting the presence of Judge Advocate General recruiters on campus. JAG, as some of you may know from television and movies, is the legal arm of the U.S. military. The reason we were protesting is not because JAG jobs are bad jobs. On the contrary, they are good jobs. We were protesting because the university where I attended law school had a non-discrimination policy. Since in those days the military refused entry to homosexuals, we reasoned that it was a violation of the university's non-discrimination policy to allow JAG recruiters on campus. I did not go to law school straight out of college. In fact, I had not gone straight through college either, but had taken a year off to work. I had worked for a total of 4 years before attending law school. So I was 4 years older than most of my classmates and 5 years older than most of the first-year law students, because this was my second year of law school. Many of the younger people at this demonstration had never been to a demonstration before and were at a loss as to what to do. So I explained that we were going to march in front of the law school in a circle and chant slogans explaining why we were there and what our objections were. I thought it was hilarious instructing younger people on how to demonstrate. What was even more hilarious was that I was doing so in a business suit because I had an interview that afternoon with a defense contractor. I ended up getting the job. I think it was because the manager of the lawyer who wanted to hire me, who was not himself a lawyer, was an Irish American who was getting ready to leave town on a business trip and wanted to have the interview in a bar. When I ordered a Jack Daniel's straight with no chaser, he looked surprised. When I drank it, I was 99% sure I had the job. I was right. The defense contractor was a software company. They developed gaming software used by the US military to simulate various conflict situations, to test their military strategies and tactics. Because I was working for a company that produced defense technology, part of my job was to read the trade press in addition to working on active deals. Because the deals involved mainframe computer technology, and because I was the only person on the contract team who had actually developed software on mainframe computers, the business people would let me run the negotiations. Due to my active involvement in these deals and reading the trade press, I came to the realization that the US military has technology that is many decades ahead of civilian technology. This was a real eye-opener with respect to disconnecting from the matrix. In 1985, I was in my last semester of law school. One day, I was walking home from the train to my apartment in Center City, Philadelphia. I was about 20 yards from my home when I noticed two people sitting in the front seat of an illegally parked car in front of the building right next to the building I lived in. There was a man on the driver's side and a woman on the passenger side. I could tell from the animated tenor of their conversation and their body language that these two people were falling in love. I thought, how sweet. When I got within a few feet of the rear of the car, the man suddenly elbowed the woman. She hastily gathered her things, quickly exited the car, and said to the man, "Thanks for the ride. See you at work tomorrow." Then she went into the building right next door to mine. I thought, that's weird. A moment ago, these two were falling in love, and all of a sudden she has to leave? Furthermore, I had never seen this woman before, yet she lived next door to me. I knew practically everyone in that block. But I did not think too much more about it at the time. 4 days later was Friday. It was 5 o'clock in the afternoon. I was planning to go to a wine tasting in the suburbs with a friend of mine. She lived a 15-minute walk away from me. This person takes forever to get ready, and we needed to catch a suburban train to make the wine tasting. I did not want to miss the train and be late for the event, since the trains ran only twice an hour. So I called her at 5 o'clock and told her to get ready because I was leaving right then and there to come over to her apartment. I told her that so she would hurry up and get ready, thinking I was coming over right away. However, I wasn't coming over right away. I was planning on leaving my apartment at 5:30, so I would get to her place at 5:45 and then hustle her out the door by 6 so we could get to the train we wanted to catch and arrive at the wine tasting on time. So I hung out until 5:30 before leaving the apartment. When I got out the front door, there was the same car I had seen 4 days earlier, parked illegally in the same spot, with the same two people in the front seat, the man on the driver's side and the woman on the passenger side. Only this time, they looked like every cop show and every cop movie you've ever seen. They were dressed in trench coats and reading the newspaper. When I got to the bottom of the stairs in front of my building to the sidewalk, it was the same show as the previous Tuesday. The man spotted me first, nudged the woman, and flew out of the car, saying she'd see him at work on Monday. Now I knew something was seriously wrong, so I looked at the license plate and burst out laughing. The car had U.S. government plates.
Oh.
You absolutely cannot make this stuff up.
Whoa.
2 FBI agents were spying on me in an illegally parked car. It was at that moment I understood that law enforcement rents apartments in cities that they use to spy on people they want to surveil. That's why I had never seen the woman who allegedly lived in the building next door, because she did not live there. The reason they were reading the newspaper is because they had been informed by their buddies who'd been listening to my telephone tap that I was leaving at 5. They had no idea I was actually leaving at 5:30. The next day, I got on my tapped telephone and called several of my friends to tell them about the incompetent federal agents that were attempting to spy on me. We laughed and laughed at the incompetence of the feds, another eye-opener. In fact, one of my friends told me that for some reason her father was being spied on, so that they were spying on her as a child in the elementary school playground, and she could spot them as a child. So, I mean, we're telling these stories on my tapped phone, laughing and laughing. In fact, I was sorely tempted to call the FBI and tell them if they want to spy on people, they should not do it from illegally parked cars with U.S. government plates, because when they do, their agents stick out like sore thumbs. I also wanted to tell them their agents should not sit in illegally parked cars with U.S. government plates, wearing trench coats, and reading the newspaper. Remember, there were no smartphones back then. I do not know whether the FBI was spying on me because of the telephone call I had received the previous year from Rocco the Mafia Don, whether they were spying on me because I had a job interview scheduled with the FBI, we'll get to that story in a minute, or whether they were just student FBI agents who had been assigned to practice on a random person. Either way, you just cannot invent this kind of absurdity. Why, you may ask, would a person who had had a CIA agent planted on them 6 years earlier have an interview for a special agent position at the FBI? This is what happened. During my last semester of law school, a recruiter from the FBI came on campus to interview any third-year student who wanted to sign up for an interview. I took advantage of this opportunity, not simply because I needed a job upon graduation, but again, for research purposes. At the time, the FBI was recruiting people in 4 categories: lawyers, which was why they were interviewing on a law school campus, women, experienced computer professionals, and military veterans. Because I satisfied 3 out of those 4 criteria, again, I'm a pacifist, so I'm not a veteran, the FBI recruiter told me that I was a very strong candidate and was practically salivating over me because he would no doubt get a commission if I were hired. He recommended me for a follow-up session at the FBI office in Philadelphia. So I went to the FBI office along with several other recruits. First, we were given a talk by a seasoned FBI special agent about how boring, scary, and exciting the life of an FBI special agent can be. He explained that you carry a gun and get special defensive and offensive driving training. The gun didn't interest me, but the special driving training did. It sounded like Hollywood stunt driving. And the special agent presentation, after the special agent presentation and a short film, they gave us an 8-part battery of what they called aptitude tests. The first 2 parts involved reading a fact pattern, waiting for 5 minutes, and then answering questions about the fact pattern. In addition to having a very good memory, as a lawyer, I'm specially trained to analyze fact patterns, so I know I aced those 2 parts. As it turned out, the first 2 parts were the only objective parts of the test. The other 6 parts were standard personality tests of different kinds. I knew that because I majored in psychology as an undergraduate, and I'm very familiar with these particular tests. In the year I took off from college, I worked as a medical research assistant in the preventive cardiology division of the cardiology department of Boston Children's Hospital, a teaching hospital of Harvard Medical School. Excuse me. Part of my job involved administering and coding these very same personality tests. When I returned to college, I took a social psychology class where the students in the class took these tests. Due to my experience with them, I volunteered to do the computer coding and analysis, so I knew perfectly well how I score on these tests. Excuse me. My first impulse was to fill out the personality tests to assure that I would get a job. Then I thought better of it, because Did I really want to carry a gun and be an FBI agent? I was way too fond of my bohemian lifestyle for that. So I decided to answer the text truthfully. Sure enough, a few weeks later, I received a letter saying I was rejected because I didn't score high enough on the so-called aptitude tests. I laughed my other end off. First of all, I know I aced the first two parts. With respect to the standard personality psychometrics, since I know how I test out on those instruments, I realized exactly what the FBI is not looking for in a special agent. I test out as a highly independent, extremely creative, original thinker who is very high on risk-taking and sensation-seeking and has a strong internal locus of control. That is not what the FBI is looking for in a special agent. They want middle-of-the-road personalities who will do what they are told and obey orders without question. They want people who will submit to authority reliably without making trouble. The last thing they want in a special agent is a highly creative, original, independent thinker. Now let's get into what life coach Nancy Ellis calls the 8 stages of recovery from religion, because these are the same phases most people go through when disconnecting from the matrix, realizing that the media have been lying to them. Stage 1, the stage of noticing contradictions. For example, a religion may preach unconditional love and inclusivity, but the religious community itself is biased and judgmental and behaves more like an exclusive club. Or religious leaders may fail to practice what they preach and even be exposed for abusing their power. For example, how many scandals have there been with so-called Christian leaders who have railed against homosexuality from the pulpit, yet have been caught in homosexual and sometimes pedophilic homosexual relationships? And consider all of the religions engaging in inequality, where women are considered spiritually inferior, or where people are condemned for their sexual orientation or other nonconformist tendencies. I once counseled an acquaintance who was extremely upset because he had been shunned and shamed by a group of Jehovah's Witnesses for smoking a cigarette. I calmly explained to him that these people could not possibly be Christians because Jesus would never shun anyone for smoking a cigarette. I mean, talk about hypocrisy. Oh, I love everybody unconditionally, but you're shunned because you didn't conform to what we do. Oh, please. They think they're Christians. Stage 2, the stage of questioning. The last thing most religions want is an honest examination. They want strict adherence to their dogma and rituals. In other words, most religions are extremely authoritarian. If you've been beholden to religious dogma for many years, the questioning stage can be quite an eye-opener. And while provable knowledge shatters illusion, it can also lead to fear and confusion during the awakening process. I had a dear friend in New Mexico, who I'll talk about in a minute, who was completely shaken by the Epstein scandal. We'll get to that later. Third, stage 3, the stage of denial. This stage can be extremely difficult for people whose family and sense of community is largely associated with their religion. This is very similar to people choosing to be true to their own sexual orientation and coming out of the closet. The choice may be apparent, but it can be very difficult to understand and accept. That is because choosing to leave one's religion is often a choice between betraying those one loves and continuing to betray oneself. Stage 4, the stage of letting go. Even though one may be ready to embrace an entirely new belief system, separating one's life from religion is not a trivial process. One goes through an in-depth evaluation of one's identity and role in society, as well as rejecting a whole lot of what one once considered fact. Once one has undergone a deep and profound self-evaluation, it becomes necessary to disengage from the past. The exciting thing about letting go is that it is in fact a process of self-discovery. Going deeply within requires letting go of psychological and emotional detritus one acquired through the dogma of religion. Like if you masturbate, you're going to go to hell. Right? There's some seriously sick things that religions teach people. Letting go of religious beliefs can result in the complete disintegration of one's life. But guess what? Destruction is the first step in the process of creation. That's why it is necessary to abandon an old belief system completely before adopting an entirely new one. This can spark an identity crisis, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. The good news is that once you accept your own truth unconditionally, you can no longer live with the false reality of religion. But in order to truly let go, one must make one's exit official. This can be extremely difficult. Many years ago, I made the acquaintance of a man who had been raised in the Lubavitcher sect of Orthodox Judaism. This man came to the realization that he was in a cult, and he realized he'd been brainwashed, and that the Lubavitcher Rebbe, who was still alive at the time, was not the Messiah, as this man had been raised to believe. Yet, he found himself completely unable to cut his hair and remove his yarmulke. He was awake, yet unable to let go. But one has to be able to let go in order to be able to think independently. Stage 5, the coming out stage. When religion rules your family, and perhaps also your social life, coming out of the religious closet can be as difficult as coming out as anything other than heterosexual can be to one's family and friends. As with coming out about one's sexuality, one must put one's own personal integrity and identity above all else. This may feel selfish and wrong, but the truth is that it is the most authentic thing a person can do, especially if you think the people you are coming out to will want to get you to question your choice or will try to manipulate you into changing your mind through guilt, rejection, and other forms of control. It requires a great deal of mental and emotional strength to do this, as all forms of coming out of the closet do. The one thing to avoid in this situation is attempting to convince anyone else of your new beliefs. That will only lead to conflict and resentment in a situation where you are seeking acceptance above all else. The reason any kind of coming out is a dangerous process is because it can destroy relationships. But sometimes it is necessary to destroy relationships if one is to be true to oneself. This must be done without arguing and by being completely firm with one's boundaries. The coming out process is seldom easy, but it is not only necessary, it is totally worth it. Stage 6, the stage of self-discovery and exploration. There is a great quotation from Nancy Ellis. Quote, "Until we consciously disentangle our worth from religion, we unconsciously suppress expression." Unquote. I'm going to read that again because it's so good. Until we consciously disentangle our worth from religion, we unconsciously suppress expression. In other words, freeing yourself from dogmatic religious beliefs opens up a new world of life choices, values, perspectives, and in some cases, an entirely new personality. When you're free of religion, you're on an entirely new path of self-discovery and an entirely new way to express yourself. When you free yourself from religion, you can live your life on your own terms, not the ones your previous religion demanded that you conform to. Such freedom may be a little scary at first, but it is also extremely liberating. Stage 7, the stage of forgiveness and reconciliation. Now that you're firmly ensconced in your new life, you have to forgive the people who brainwashed and mind-controlled you. One of the reasons the Lubavitcher man I mentioned earlier could not let go of his religion was because he was harboring tremendous anger against the Lubavitcher Rebbe for having brainwashed him and the entire religious community he grew up in. My personal opinion is that the reason he couldn't forgive the rabbi and his family and religious community was because he could not forgive himself for buying into it his entire life. I tried in vain to convince him of the need for forgiveness, but he wasn't having it. 10 years ago, I made the acquaintance of another man who had been raised in the Lubavitcher community and had successfully removed himself from it. He told me once, "I'm not a Jew, I'm a human being." However, due to the judgmental and unforgiving nature of his family and the religious community he'd been raised in, bilateral reconciliation was not possible. He was able to forgive them, but they were not able to forgive him. He had compassion for them, but due to the rigidity of their religious beliefs and practices, they were unable to have compassion for him. Yet this young man was extremely happy to be living his life in an authentic manner. While being rejected by his entire family and the friends and neighbors he'd grown up with, the price of authenticity was totally worth it for him because he treasured the freedom and ability to think for himself. And now we're at the last stage, stage 8, the stage of integration. The freedom that comes with recovery from religion can leave a huge gap in one's family and social life. But it also creates the opportunity to find a new community of people who accept you just the way you are, without having to share their beliefs, and in some cases, their values. There may be a period of time where you feel devoid of support systems, but you will naturally gravitate to new people and new communities that will provide the support systems that were previously afforded by religion. This process can be frightening and difficult, but it is also extremely liberating. The freedom that comes with integrating oneself into a new life without religion is its own reward. When the masses awaken to the extent they have been lied to by the mainstream news media, the result will be freedom all over the world. The good news is that the Jeffrey Epstein story is precipitating a mass awakening around the world, the likes of which have never been seen. The former Soviet Union is not an example of mass awakening because the Soviet population were always well aware of the fact that their official newspaper, Pravda, which means truth, was all lies and propaganda. One of the first events that precipitated the fall of the Soviet Union was an official government news briefing where the statements coming from the government were so absurd and unbelievable that every journalist in the room burst out laughing. Authoritarians are huge egotists who take themselves very seriously. One thing they cannot abide is being laughed at. This is how the tiny country of Denmark was able to defeat the Nazi invasion. You know that story?
No.
Okay. For those of you who don't know that particular piece of history, allow me to share it with you. When Hitler invaded Denmark, he ordered the Danish king to summon his subjects in Copenhagen to appear before him and the Nazis the next day in a large city square. Hitler instructed that all Danish Jews appear wearing a yellow Star of David. Yeah, the king of Denmark complied with Hitler's orders, but not completely. The very next day, 9,000 Danes assembled in the square, but no Jews were wearing yellow Stars of David because they had not been instructed to. Instead, the king himself appeared wearing a yellow Star of David. Now, I don't know how many Danish people you know or how much you know about Danish culture, but what I can tell you for a fact is that Danes are very funny people. They have a tremendous sense of humor. And if you don't believe me, have a few beers sometime with my Danish-American friend Wayne Madsen, who will have you falling on your ass laughing. Yes, that Wayne Madsen, the journalist and conspiracy researcher. You familiar with Wayne Madsen? This group should be. If you're not, you should be.
Is he the one that came and spoke?
No, but Wayne writes for a lot of different publications. His site is the Wayne Madsen, WayneMadsenReport.com. Just put his name in, Wayne Madsen, Madsen. He's something. So, when the Danish citizens saw their king in front of the Nazis wearing a yellow Star of David, they laughed and laughed and laughed. The Nazis were so flummoxed by thousands of laughing Danes that they turned tail and fled, never to return. Since we the people will never have the firepower to fight fascists with firearms and bombs, our best weapon is, and always will be, laughter. Now here's the good news. The U.S. American population has never been aware of the extent to which the mainstream media have been lying to them, until now, and all because of Jeffrey Epstein. Let me share with you a highly instructive personal story. Last Tuesday, August 13th, I received an email from one of my oldest and dearest friends from elementary school who lives on a ranch in New Mexico. The subject line was, "I am humbled." She addressed me as my dearest, dearest Marcy. She then went on to explain that when I told her back in 2016 that this world is controlled by pedophile rings among the elite, including politicians in Washington, D.C., world leaders, captains of industry, and famous actors, musicians, and other entertainers, she dismissed the whole idea as preposterous. She thought it was crackpot. Not only that, she questioned my sanity. This woman is highly intelligent, but had been very deeply asleep. Let me just make a note here. I'm finding all the errors in what I wrote out. Because I'll distribute this if people want the hard copy. The Epstein scandal shook her to the core. She realized in one fell swoop that the world is not as she had been led to believe. Needless to say, this was extremely shocking to her. But since she is a super intelligent person, she very much wants to learn the truth. So she was reaching out to me to point her in the right direction. I told her that since she has absorbed the pedophilia part of this scandal, she was ready for the next part. I explained that the wealthy elites on this planet observe an ancient Babylonian devil-worshipping religion whose religious rituals involve child torture, human sacrifice, and cannibalism, and that this is why there is a Babylonian temple on Little St. James Island. This is also why there are ancient Babylonian symbols all over the theater in Hollywood where the Academy Awards are held, and why there were 2 Egyptian sarcophagi outside the Baptist Church in Newark, New Jersey, where Whitney Houston's funeral was held. Whitney was a devout Christian who didn't want anything to do with satanic religious practices. Yet Whitney's death was a satanic ritual sacrifice. Why do you think a body was left in the hotel for hours instead of being removed immediately? Her corpse remained in the hotel until Clive Davis's satanic party in the hotel that night was over. Shouldn't that party have been canceled? It would have been if it had not been thrown by a Satanist for other Satanists. The reason this part of the Jeffrey Epstein story has not been made public yet is because these truths, so familiar to us in this room and in the dnny group, is overwhelmingly shocking to people such as my dear childhood friend in New Mexico. The truth surrounding Jeffrey Epstein has to come out in pieces so the general public can absorb it. But there is reason to be hopeful. Everyone here knows that the mainstream media narrative of Jeffrey Epstein having committed suicide is utter nonsense for a myriad of reasons. First of all, sociopathic narcissists who have huge amounts of money and have gotten away with committing crimes all of their lives through the high-level government and intelligence connections do not commit suicide. They think they are the smartest guys in the room and will always come out on top. Second, Jeffrey Epstein was the highest profile prisoner in the history of this country. So it's strange credulity to believe a man under 24-hour video surveillance could commit suicide when there was nothing in his cell to commit suicide with and nowhere in his cell to hang himself from. Third, excuse me, it further strains credulity that a person on suicide watch was not being checked on every 9 minutes by a human being, which is the protocol for suicide watch. Fourth, who can possibly believe that the guards on duty fell asleep? Were they drugged? And fifth, How can tapes from the CCTV not exist? If there had been an actual malfunction in the equipment, wouldn't it have been remedied immediately? Or wouldn't Epstein have been moved to a cell where there was functioning camera surveillance? Also, the prior alleged suicide attempt is also not credible. Who can possibly commit suicide by self-strangulation? And why is it that Attorney General William Barr visited Jeffrey Epstein in prison at the time of his initial injuries? There are two glaring reasons why William Barr should recuse himself completely. First, his former law firm, Kirkland & Ellis, represented Jeffrey Epstein in Epstein's criminal case in Florida, where Epstein was handed a ridiculously lenient and patently illegal deal. Second, it was William Barr's father, Donald Barr, who was the headmaster at the Dalton School that hired a 20-year-old Jeffrey Epstein to teach math and physics when Jeffrey Epstein did not have a college degree. A college degree is required for a teaching license, and it is illegal to teach full-time without a teaching license. Do you really think the headmaster at one of the most elite and prestigious preparatory schools in the country did not know that? None of this makes any sense. And just as an aside, it's recently come out that Donald Barr wrote a science fiction novel about sex slavery.
It's crazy. Off planet.
I mean, you just can't make this up. In fact, it's been reported that when he was at the Dalton School, Jeffrey Epstein used to walk around in a fur coat and gold chains and his shirt open. And Stephen Colbert said, "What was he teaching? Pimping?" I love it. I love it. But here's the really good part, and why I'm hopeful. A recent poll showed that only 29% of the U.S. American public believes that Jeffrey Epstein committed suicide. In other words, 71% of our fellow citizens are convinced that the mainstream media are lying to them about this. That poll also indicated that 42% believe that Jeffrey Epstein was murdered, which suggests that the other 29% believe he was either put in witness protection, is in a CIA safe house somewhere, or is sunning himself on a private beach in Israel. I obtained these statistics from an essay Caitlin Johnstone posted yesterday, August 17th, which I had asked Nick to distribute to the dnny group. I would like to share with you a direct quote from her essay about this poll. "Never in my life have I seen such a widespread and instantaneous rejection of an establishment promulgated narrative in the United States. This is hugely significant. The entire imperial oppression machine is held together with aggressive plutocratic propaganda. The ability of the ruling class to manipulate the way people think, act, and vote is the only thing stopping the public from using the power of their numbers to force real changes and create a new system that is not built upon endless war, ecocide, and exploitation. The mass media propaganda engine is now at its weakest and most vulnerable point ever, and the narrative managers' attempts to regain control are only exposing them more severely. Power is the ability to control what happens. Absolute power is the ability to control what people think about what happens. Our rulers are rapidly losing this absolute power. People are waking up." Thank you, Caitlin. I couldn't have said it better myself. The Great Awakening is underway. This is the moment we have all been waiting for. So enjoy the ride. Thank you all for listening.
Woo! Scott! Marcy, thank you so much. That's a lot. Oh my God, that is incredible. Thank you. You got a question?
I got a bunch of points if I can.
Please.
Dalton School was always a wacky school. So him walking around dressed like that is not so odd. Read Auntie Mae, there's a whole section on the wacky reputation the Dalton School had. It was never a conservative school. It was ultra liberal. Then I read that William Barr actually had left the school by the time Jeffrey.
You mean Donald Barr?
Yeah, the Barr guy, the father. The father was the
Yes,
person
he
that-
left in June of the semester before, which suggested he hired him for the following year.
Yeah, he may have
Yeah.
hired him, but considering how wacky the school was, him not having everything, there's probably read Auntie Mae about the class that was taught at Dalton. I had a friend who went to Dalton. She was Puerto Rican, and it was at a time before, Puerto Ricans could get into the most prestigious schools. So they were very open and very liberal. So it's a wacky school to begin with. Took advantage of it. The other thing I was curious
Yeah, but they still
about,
have lawyers.
I'm not sure. I'm just saying it was a crazy school at the time, and he was a young guy. The other thing that I wanted to point out, I was curious about, your friend in New Mexico. Didn't she have an inkling of anything with Harvey Weinstein?
Well,
Didn't that make her...
Harvey Weinstein wasn't pedophilia. He
But
didn't.
He did actually. He did do young girls.
he was just as wide a sexual expanse as Epstein. And he's still not in jail. He's still fighting it.
But he wasn't involved with politicians and world leaders.
He told Hillary Clinton that he gave money. He told her when she was running that he wanted her to do something to stop the Black Lives Matter movement. So he had connections.
Yeah, but it wasn't on the scale of Epstein.
I think it was, but it was, we don't know yet because he's still fighting it. He hasn't gone to court yet. And there was other things. There was mass arrests of pedophiles in 2016. Plus there was that, what's his name? Hillary's assistant's husband, Ryan.
We still
all
haven't.
this stuff on her laptop.
Which we still haven't seen
exactly.
the fallout from, because he's got
Exactly.
tapes.
But maybe the combination of all that, plus this is what got her to talk to you about it.
Well, I think that the scope of the Epstein case was just so much bigger than Weinstein.
Oh, yeah.
And most of the women that are complaining about Weinstein were not 12 or 13 or 14 or 15. And I think that was so much more shocking.
He settled with a lot of those women, by the way. But no, those
I've never
women
read that.
fought.
That hasn't gotten into the...
Oh, I heard that. I heard that yesterday. But the ones who didn't settle are the ones that keep going. And there's more, but my time's off.
No,
in case
okay.
anyone else
You
wants
asked
to say.
before we- Is there any other people who want to? I have some questions. Tom, do you want to say something?
Yeah.
I guess, it's not really that much of a question. Are you familiar with a little community in northern Italy called Damanhur?
No.
I don't know if I can find it. I have a DVD, but this is relevant to what you were talking about the plants and the animals having feelings. There's a man in Damanhur, and this appears on the DVD, who connected up electrodes to a plant, right? And he's playing his guitar, right? And then he's getting electric signals back from the plant. And he figured out how to decode them, right? And the plant is giving music back, improvising on what he's playing on his guitar. They go back and forth.
Doesn't
like that.
surprise me for a minute.
Wow.
Okay.
That is cool.
Dee, did you have something?
It's interesting that I'm coming to a different position on Epstein, and that listening to you, it almost made me think that, well, if I was going to pursue a mass media, there is fake news agenda, which Trump is pursuing. He's constantly saying there's fake news. The best way to do that would be to allow Epstein to appear to be murdered in a federal lockdown so that people could see the absurdity, which can only reinforce his agenda, if you think about it, when he is actually in control of the federal lockdown facility. So, and that was interesting because I really didn't pick up on that until you spoke about it. And then lastly, I'm starting to look at Epstein as you know, I do money laundering.
You don't do money laundering, you study it.
I'm actually doing money laundering, and I'm starting to look more at Jeffrey Epstein as when you go take an airplane flight, or you go to a hotel, you get free drinks, you get the snack bar, you're entertained on your flight. And I'm now my personal opinion is that Jeffrey Epstein was escorting other people into Little St. John so that they could access their Lesser Antilles offshore accounts. So he was providing the liquor, the girls, the entertainment, because this would also explain why the Dershowitz and the other people are flying down to Little St. John's because
St. James.
St. James, because I worked for Bernie Kornfeld and Vesco, and they would go into Bermuda and fly to Paradise Island to access their accounts. But you only saw them go into Bermuda. Then they would take the private flight into the banks, which, if anybody knows, is Virgin Gorda, which was set up by Lawrence Rockefeller. It's the last island in the British Virgin Islands. So I find that's where I'm coming to the point where I'm seeing him not as an enabler, but as what would you call somebody who's hired to entertain, a caterer?
But it's still more than that, because if that were the case and that were the sole reason, there wouldn't have been cameras everywhere. It was a honeypot operation. There's definitely doing blackmail. It was there for blackmail purposes.
Well, of course, everybody, I mean, when you're dealing in pedophilia, I mean, it's obvious, but okay, so that's just my point. I just see him as a caterer.
Well, it's entirely possible, and Whitney Webb in that 3-part series that I mentioned, she does get into some of the banking stuff and the mafia banking stuff in the Virgin Islands. It's well worth reading.
It's all part of it. Yeah.
Oh yeah, it's all connected.
I want to just pick up on something else that was going on. If there's an operation and you have cameras and you have recording equipment and you're making it possible for you to be with a 15-year-old girl because you really told me you want that and I arranged that, and then I'm recording this, and you're a big deal, you're a multimillionaire, and you are a multimillionaires, and you say, I want to be with young boys, and I say, I can arrange that, and I do, and it's recorded, and now I've got some files here on you guys, okay, that you would never in a million years want to be out in the public. Okay, so I've got that. So now I've got you, in a sense, under my thumb. So my question is, and Marcy, I don't have an answer for this, but I just want your thoughts. So I could say to someone, look, I've got something on him, and I know that you want him to be manipulated for reasons you have, so I can sell you this for $5 million. Do you want it? In other words, my business is to sell that to people who want to then say, now I've got him, and then they can control. So what I'm doing here is a business of that. And my clients could be anybody who wants to control other people, and that's what goes on all the time. Or he's an agent for one particular group he's doing the same thing, but he's working for someone else, not himself as a business partner. You see the difference?
Well, here's the thing. I don't think they're necessarily mutually exclusive, because it's unclear where all his money came from. What is clear is he wasn't a hedge fund manager. Now, certainly he could be blackmailing the people he's got the goods on. In addition, I saw an interview it was on Fox News where a guy was saying that he could have gotten a lot of his money from sex trafficking, because sex traffickers can make $200,000 to $250,000 tax-free dollars a year per child.
Whoa.
This is a multi-billion dollar a year industry. So it's possible that Epstein was into all kinds of things to get all this
It
money.
could be all of that.
It could be all of it. That's what I'm saying. It's not mutually exclusive. It could be a whole variety of things. It's just that we do know that he was not what he said he was.
At all. No,
No.
that's for sure. By the way, Giuliani was on TV the other night and he said, I know that prison really well. Obviously, he's been there a long time. And he said they always have paper sheets, not cloth sheets,
Yeah.
because that's a suicide watch.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that makes sense. But they're saying that he strangled himself.
With
but they're
what?
not saying, because you assume it's cloth sheets.
I thought they took him off.
Yeah, they did take him off.
But
Which
even-
is why there's a big row. How could they take
But
him off?
even if they
And
did,
the cameras were turned outward,
but
not inward.
even if they did take him off suicide watch, there's still nothing he could possibly have hung himself with.
His pants, take off his pants.
No,
Is that
because
was he's nude?
it's,
Everything is paper, it's like in a hospital. where
yeah,
Oh, I
yeah,
see.
yeah,
I see.
it's
They no
impossible.
longer use sheets because they don't do laundry.
I see.
And you're in a cell with an 8-foot
But they're
ceiling.
paper, right?
Okay, I
How,
know that.
and what do you hang yourself from?
I didn't, well,
What do you hang yourself from, even if you had something to hang
the
yourself
bunk bed,
with?
they said, but.
That's not possible.
No, I know, I
It's
didn't
not
know
high
about
enough.
the paper. That obviously means he couldn't have used that.
There's no way. And in fact, a week ago Saturday, the New York Post reported his alleged suicide, and then the next day, the New York Post on the first page published an article co-written by someone who's been in the MCC a few times, explaining exactly why suicide was impossible. So they basically retracted their own story.
And the official, this morning on the internet, the official coroner report, that report said, yes, he took his own life. Yes, he did.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I heard
The
that
official
part.
said that,
That's
which is
very-
bullshit.
Well, the hyoid bone was broken. That happens 1% of the time in hanging. It's this. The more you look at it,
Nobody believes it, very few believe it, and as you said, it's going to be investigated and talked about. So I think that the story is not over.
Oh.
What is the government going to do about his estate?
Oh, that's.
well, his estate is being sued by some of the girls that he
Yeah.
molested. There are new lawsuits being filed all the time, especially since last week here in New York, a new law took effect, getting rid of the statute of limitations for sexual.
Getting rid of what?
Getting rid of the statute of limitations for sexual molestation victims. So there were, I don't know, a couple of hundred suits against the Catholic Church,
Oh,
but
God.
that opens up the door for all of his victims to
Speaking
come
of all of
forward.
his victims, it was on that he wanted 3 sexual encounters per day.
Per day, yeah.
That's right.
3 orgasms
Well,
a day.
add that up, 3
And
a
he
day.
received
So
$250,000 for
that's
every
3 a
encounter.
day,
No,
times
that's-
7, that's, so 3
3
times
hots
7.
and a cot.
And do the math. We're talking thousands, right?
Well, he was a billionaire, so.
I
Thousands
think they killed a lot
of
too.
girls.
I mean, that's the whole,
Absolutely.
the whole thing though, is a lot of them don't live long enough to, that's why they get them hooked on drugs, or they do
Yes.
all these other things, so they can just have the girl OD, or the boy OD, or they go off the
Or
rails, or.
sacrifice them in a satanic ceremony. That's why he spent $100,000 on cement to fill in the
Cement?
tunnels underneath.
Yeah, you
Because
don't know
there are all
what
these
bones are there.
underground tunnels, they were. Little St. James Island was a stop on a Disney cruise. Okay, we go snorkeling, right? They probably had a sub underneath the cruise ship, and they were taking girls so they couldn't be seen by the satellite, and through those underground tunnels and bringing them in underground. Because if you look at the photographs, and there's lots of really good drone footage, there were heavy-duty iron locks on the outside
Yeah,
of
I
that
saw that.
temple. On the outside. They were keeping them, there were dungeons underneath that island.
How did he get these girls? In what way?
Oh, they're all that's been detailed and explained. First of all, he had assistants such as Ghislaine Maxwell, or Ghislaine
Right.
Maxwell, however you want to pronounce it,
Right.
and various other, quote, employees that would approach these girls, usually poor, say, hey, you want to make some money? There's this wealthy guy who likes to have pretty girls massage him. He won't grope you, and then, of course, he would turn around and grope them. And the ones who refused to have sex with him, he would say, well, bring me more girls and I'll pay you. So he took advantage of a lot of, and I'll tell you something, this is not unusual. There is sex trafficking going on right now, here today, in New York City. It's the same.
know.
It's going on in my neighborhood. I mean, the parents of these girls don't have the resources to fight them. These are vulnerable children. I mean, that's why my friend in New Mexico freaked out. She had no clue the scale of this. Yes, Dino?
Well, for those people that would like to see it up close and personal, you need only go to the Port Authority bus terminal.
Exactly.
And go down to the bottom floor for where they have all the Greyhound buses coming in from all over all over the nation. And just look at the unescorted 13
Yeah.
and 14-year-old
The runaways. All right.
runaways coming in. And then you can actually see the pimps and everyone waiting for them outside the station. And they are making the deals as they come out
Yeah.
for them to have a nice place to stay or a meal. And they know that these children have no financial assistance. And I'm only saying you can actually see it in action on the sidewalk outside of Port Authority.
Is some of it the traditional idea of a pimp and rather than something connected to this big octopus with connections to people like
It's a network, it's a network.
Is it a network or is it sometimes just regular
It's both.
crime?
It's a floor wax and a dessert topping.
All right, okay.
Well, when I worked in a bordello in Hollywood in Beverly Hills, the girls were recruited from the best clubs in London. So you had 18 to 19-year-old girls without money trying to access this level of club. So they had already screened these girls on what level they were willing to participate. So there's an entry screening. Then the girls were just simply given a flight ticket from London to Bermuda, and from Bermuda they would fly into Miami, and from Miami they would fly into California. And they would hold on to their passports. And then the
They would
girls
take
were
their
given
passports. Yeah.
a little bit of cash, not much. They were given a place to stay for free. They were given dinners and food, not much. But then they were introduced to the wealthy. And then after they had been passed around, then they were given a return flight ticket home and their passports. So they were maybe in the mansion circuit for maybe 6 to 8 months.
And then so that's like
They were
a
returned
regular
to England.
crime.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, what
It's
happens
like
to
a
the,
riot. I mean, there's like, I think the month that the election happened, they had like 30 or 40 African American girls who disappeared in DC, and then the news stopped talking about it. So they have high, like those would be the girls that make $250,000, and then, well, they might pay $250 for like a little kid they snatch off the streets,
Yes.
but they do that too. I mean, they go around and they take pictures of kids, they catalog them, and then there's a bounty put out on them, and those are the ones I think get maybe a cold murdered faster, or
Oh,
you know
yeah.
what I mean? So it's like you have both sides of it, like you
Yeah.
said, because you have the literally where they're snatching babies or poor
Well,
kids.
they really don't need to because they have foster care.
Well, that too, yeah.
So they are actively going out and seizing children of parents who are uncooperative as a way to force. I've handled many of these cases. So, and now they're starting to come out with the foster care abuses for all these immigrant kids. But so many kids coming over the borders that even if they're cherry picking them. I'm not even sure that by the time they get to the border, the best are not even, that have already been taken.
Well, they're also, some of them, they're sent out on spec. So a wealthy guy will say, I want a girl with this color hair, this tall, these characteristics, and then they go out and look for girls that match that, and they lie to them about why they're recruiting them. They also, at least here in New York, and so if it's going on in New York, it's going on in other places. Once they've got a girl in their network, then they send her to a local high school to befriend the prettiest girls in the high school and get them into the network. I mean, It's so widespread. But I also think it's important because the media have not been making this distinction. It's very important to make the distinction between prostitution and child trafficking. There is no such thing as a child prostitute. A prostitute has the ability to consent.
Right.
A child does not have the ability to consent. A child that's having sex is being trafficked. They're not
would say
child
so.
prostitutes.
Well, what happens, please, to some of the babies that are taken while the mothers are
Some
not
of them
aware?
are ritually sacrificed and eaten.
They what?
They're ritually sacrificed and eaten. What they do is they terrify them, they'll flay them alive, because when a person's terrified, the adrenal glands produce adrenochrome, which is a substance that these crazy people think is going to make them live longer. So then they torture these babies and these children, then they eat their adrenal glands.
And they eat part of their glands?
They kill the children and eat their adrenal glands.
There's a type
How
of
did
black-
that get out, please?
There's a type of
How
black
would
witchcraft.
that detected?
It's on the Wiener laptop, which we haven't seen.
Oh
There
my
are
God.
videos of it on the
And
Wiener
there's
laptop.
black magic techniques that talk about that from Africa.
Yeah.
Reading that, but going back to something you were saying. So we have all these children that are coming over. This is part of the problem. That are coming over, being cherry picked. But you have all these political groups trying to say, no, we have to let them come in. Some of that must be manipulated too.
Because they're being
All right,
trafficked.
So to make it a point, when I was in DC last week, I had the ability to watch TV for like 4 days because I had gone to a funeral and I just wanted to zone out. Every commercial on this one particular station, they had an ad going on that said, foster care, just keep thinking about it. So it was scenarios of people in this advertising commercial, and the guy goes, you're number 34 in line, and she goes, oh, 34, that's the number of kids that need foster care parents. And then they would go, and the tagline on the ad was, foster care, at least talk about it. So already they're getting the
pipeline.
mass population to accept the idea that we are now going to have foster care parents for a huge population
Huge pipeline.
of young immigrants. So if they're doing it on television, every commercial, it's in DC. Now they're not playing in New York, but they are playing in DC and Maryland. It's only a next step for the election system before it comes here.
Oh, wow, that's incredible.
Well, and part of the reason why children have been separated from their parents at the borders with no documentation on where they are is because some of these children have been trafficked.
Well, yeah,
Well,
well,
do you
think-
families, they were stolen
Yeah.
or their parents were suckered into selling them to these coyotes.
And some
Do
of
you
them were
think-
found here in New York because they
After
brought
the Haiti
them. Sorry.
earthquake, they had kids that they were supposedly taking into rescue, and it was like they were kind of channeling them to trafficking too. So, I mean, every time there's natural disasters, I think they said, even in like Syria and stuff, they said that there's kids disappearing over
Oh,
there
yeah.
too. These aid groups supposedly are going in there, and they never hear from these kids again either. So I think, there's a wide variety of flavors, to be disrespectful, but it's a flavor that someone says, I want a Middle Eastern kid today.
It's
and
true.
they pay for it. I mean, it's just like,
It's true.
I think even that movie Saw, when it came out, like I have a lot of friends who are like, no, I think they actually do get kids to come over here so some sicko can, has their murder fantasy.
Yes.
So any level of what you want to do to somebody, if you have the means, someone will go procure that for you. So they can hunt you down, and then they dangle it in our faces in like TV and stuff.
Well,
You know?
the Clinton Foundation was trafficking children in Haiti.
Well, okay,
I'm
so
just
to
wondering,
prove your
is it
point-
possible that in some secret way Trump is involved?
Absolutely.
What?
Sure, there has to be some. He can't go to all these functions and not forget. But the
Wonder
point
about
is, the day that Jeffrey Epstein is arrested is the day, I think he was arrested on like a Monday or Tuesday. The day he's arrested, a major UN AIDS group guy is convicted in am I pronouncing it right? Thailand, where they had the Phuket,
Phuket.
Phuket, Thailand, on pedophilia, and he's going to serve 40 to 60 years, if not life. So this man ran the largest child, what did you call him,
Child pornography.
No.
Trafficker.
Child aid for children on the streets for the UN.
Yeah. Oh, the UN is dirty as can be.
So he's arrested the day Epstein is arrested, but this guy is convicted.
Yeah, because they wanted to get that out of the news cycle with Epstein.
But there's also good people out there that are against this kind of thing. So, okay, everybody automatically wants to blame Trump. It's possible he's being used by the other side to try to control. They have to play the games. People aren't just going to walk in and say it's all okay. Who would be on the other side? People who would be against this kind of activity and would be investigating. And because when I saw that there was a sweep of pedophilia arrests in 2016, I read it, try to find it now. I should have kept copies of it. Through LA, Chicago, even in Paris. There was a sweep of it. There are people who do care about this and want to stop this.
Well, the Trump administration, the Trump administration in the first few months in office arrested more pedophiles than 8 years of Obama. Because under the Obama Justice Department, the attorney in the Justice Department who was responsible for prosecuting pedophilia cases was himself a pedophile.
What? He what?
And the Obama administration,
Yes.
the attorney at the Justice Department who was responsible for prosecuting
Yes.
pedophilia cases was himself a pedophile.
Oh, say it.
Oh, honey.
So that's why so Donald Trump is very serious about going after pedophilia. He may be a serial philanderer, but I don't think he's down with this pedophilia stuff.
I was doing this reading before, and I found these in part of a research project for something else I was doing. I came across this video of a man who was checking to see how involved Trump was in this. And it went into the Palm Beach story. Because I always thought that this case, Epstein case, was going back to the early 90s. But actually it was only 2003 when Palm Beach started to investigate it because one of Mar-a-Lago's members complained that Epstein had tried to proposition his 14-year-old
That's
daughter.
right.
And see, another child came home with cash in their lunchbox, and people said, "What is this?"
Yeah.
People in Palm Beach knew.
Of course they
It
knew.
was a book called Filthy Rich. I can't think of the name.
James Patterson?
Yes. He hated him, and they wrote about, the gossip was all over Palm Beach. Then they interviewed the attorney who was representing some of the young women at the time, or the children. He said that Trump not only banned him, because he was a member, so of course he knew their pictures of him together, not only banned him, but also assisted in the first case.
That's
So-
right. And he was the only one who assisted. They asked
that
for
I
all,
didn't know.
yes, they asked all kinds of people for help, and Trump was the only one who
And
assisted.
people want to involve him as a way to take it away from the Clintons, whose foundation was also being investigated. They had to dissolve it.
Yes,
But
because it
no,
was-
then we
It was
don't hear
charity
about
fraud, and it was influence peddling, and it was child sex trafficking, and it
Because
was...
Clinton, I can believe, even though he's a charmer in his own way.
Oh, no,
I can believe he was
he's-
very much involved.
Of
And I
course.
believe Trump is. People want to believe it, so they want to push it all onto him.
I hate to say this,
You gotta go.
we have to,
This was fun. Thank you all for coming.
great camp. Thank you guys for being here. Marcy, you're the best.
Interesting.
Love you.
I love
were
you too.
amazing. Thank you for that. By the way, that's a book.
Oh, I see.